All right. What else happened last night? Well, let's talk about the rest of that speech with the great Chris Bedford. He's a senior contributor over at the Federalist, and he joins us now. Chris, good to talk to you, sir.
Great to be here.
Now, I started the show going, I know people have been saying that this speech last night was super dark. I've seen some people claim that it's the darkest of Biden's presidency, but honestly, at this point, I'm not certain it was. He's given so many dark speeches, I don't even know how to rank them, Chris.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite as dark as we saw the speech at Independence Hall in Philadelphia when he was backlit by the red. It kind of looked like somebody was cosplaying as a 1940s German. That was a very strange speech. Last night, though, was the most partisan State of the Union that I've ever heard of. I've never heard of a president saying "my opponent," for example, in a speech, and he never said his name, but he references his opponent or his predecessor over a dozen times by my count. And, as soon as it began, literally within the first 90 seconds, he'd compared the Republican Party to Hitler and the Nazis, the Confederates, and then by 2 minutes also the Russians. And he compared himself at the same time to Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Delano Roosevelt in those first 2 minutes. And as soon as I heard that, I thought that fake historian, that crazy historian John Meacham, has got to have his hands on this. He's the guy who wrote, he was famous for writing a lot of interesting histories. And he's kind of had like a brain melt since Donald Trump became president. And he wrote the Independence Hall speech for Biden. So I Googled it, and sure enough, of course, the White House was bragging that John Meacham had been in the room. Because he's the kind of guy who writes that for Biden. I mean, it took 6 minutes until we got to a single domestic issue that had to do with this union, and that was about January 6th.
Yes.
The speech was dark, and what really is interesting to me at the end is that we saw the most partisan speech I've ever heard of in the State of the Union, one of the darkest speeches I've ever heard in the State of the Union, and everyone's just kind of applauded because he was able to stand up the whole time and largely deliver his words with minimal slurring. That's a pretty low bar to clear.
Really low bar. But that was the expectations game yesterday was being set up that all day long. It was like, hey, if he can make it through the speech, Democrats are going to breathe a sigh of relief. And that's what happened yesterday. He made it through. I just want to pause for a moment on this John Meacham thing, though, because Meacham, I don't think he gets enough attention for the role that he's been playing in the Biden presidency, because he does actually write, by all available reporting, almost every one of these ridiculous speeches that Biden gives. He's often got a hand in actually writing them. And I noticed some time ago, for instance, John Meacham's book in 2018, the name of the book was The Soul of America, The Battle for Our Better Angels. What does that sound like? Well, it sounds like every Joe Biden speech at the beginning of his presidency. Remember the battle for the soul of America? Those were all John Meacham speeches. He's just hawking his book by way of the president of the United States. The cover art to John Meacham's Soul of America book is now hanging in the Oval Office over Joe Biden's right shoulder as you stare at the Resolute desk, because John Meacham picked the artwork out. So, I mean, in terms of just like the people who are handling Biden and manipulating him, this guy is right there at the center.
He is, and he's someone who I think just a couple of years ago, maybe 10 years ago, was fairly well regarded as an expert American historian. And it's kind of that cult of experts thing that happens where you assume that someone really knows what they're talking about when they're on a subject that you don't really know anything about.
Right.
And then once they get onto a subject that you actually understand, you realize that person is a lunatic. It's a complete, total crazy person. And John Meacham has really outed himself as that. He's been in the president's ear since the very beginning. And the White House, you know this, because the White House always brags about it.
Yes.
They always say John Meacham came by, and they leak it to the Washington Post or send it to Playbook or somewhere else. And from the beginning, he's been telling Joe Biden, who's obviously an enfeebled old politician and a compromised candidate for the Democrats, it's important to beat Donald Trump, been telling him that he's the next Franklin Delano Roosevelt,
Of course.
that he is Abraham Lincoln, that his partisan history, and that his enemies are the enemies of civilization. And Joe Biden believes it.
And the two men have a symbiotic relationship. So Biden wants historians to write glowing hagiographies about him. And the historians, in this case, John Meacham, he spends his career writing about dead presidents. He finally has an actual living president as his plaything, and he's going to exploit that to no end.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty sick back and forth relationship. Although Biden was able to accomplish something last night. I think that in his speech, he was probably able to shore up his left flank and push back against the Democrats were getting really worried. You heard about it. The New York Times is basically in near open rebellion with their choice. The fact that he's running again. The polls are so bad over and over again. And last night, his ability to spar and stand up to that speech, even though it was dark and even though it was grim, and even though I would guess that most of Americans who were watching had gone to sleep by the time he got to immigration or other major issues, he was able to shore up some support with the Democratic Party and let them know that he was still – it seemed like the kind of speech a president who was still going to stick with it and for the next reelect came with.
You noticed something that I too noticed, which is the priorities. You know, if you're giving an address of any kind, or if you're speaking to a group of people and you want to convey that you care about the issues they care about, you usually lead with the most pressing concern. That's not what Joe Biden did last night. Biden started with things like funding the war in Ukraine. He emphasized that we need more human sacrifice as a country. He did a big push for abortion without actually using the word abortion because of how unpopular that phrase is. And it was only very late in the speech that he even brought up immigration or the economy. What did you make of that?
Yeah, his number one thing that he got to after demagoguing his opponents and coming up with a good joke at the beginning was Ukraine. And I think that's because that's a near and dear to his legacy. The idea that the Republicans are on the side of Putin and Democrats are on the side of the great holy Ukraine is essential. I mean, and that's just a disaster in itself because even our military and intelligence services know that that's a war that's being lost, and this money is just going to an absolute meat grinder. After that, he went to IVF, and you're right, he never once said abortion. He talked about different things like the care they need, or life-saving care, or medical care, or choice, or freedom. Those are the words he tried to hide the subject with. It was only after 10 p.m. I know he was 20 minutes late because of the left-wingers, probably because of the left-wingers protesting him in the street for Palestine. He was after 10 p.m. that he get to the economy. And on the economy, he said everything's great. Or if it's not great, it will be great soon. Yeah. I mean, you even had David Axelrod out there saying, well, I don't know if the triumphalism on the economy is something that fits the mood of most viewers. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until even later that he got to immigration, which is something that I know the White House doesn't understand, that Jen Psaki doesn't understand. Joe Biden seems to understand it. He seems to know that they're in trouble on this. That's why he tried to actually talk about it, and he's sparring with Marjorie Taylor Greene. They know that they're in some trouble on this, but it's so against the actual priorities of this White House and the actual policy of this White House. They kind of had to tuck it in at the back, and they checked that box.
Yes.
And the president did it forcefully in the end, but checked that box without actually trying to really upset their base. You notice when he was talking about the immigration deal, half the Democrats didn't even stand up to cheer. They don't like it.
Yeah. No, it's just awful. I mean, what we're dealing with is awful. And that bill, of course, was awful. It was a giant amnesty package dressed up as border security. Biden had a moment last night where he was threatening and menacing the justices of the Supreme Court, the few who now show up to these things anymore. They've become more and more partisan, especially under Biden. And remember, this was over the issue of abortion. In at least one case, Brett Kavanaugh was subjected to an assassination attempt over the pending Dobbs decision. Here's Biden last night attacking the Supreme Court.
With all due respect, justices, women are not without electoral power. Electoral or political power. You're about to realize just how much you're right about that.
Now, even that framing, of course, is predicated on a lie that the Supreme Court said that women don't have political power. They never said any such thing, Chris Bedford.
No, they just said that very obviously wrongly decided Roe v. Wade by not just my estimation, but by a lot of liberal justices' estimation, by Ruth Bader Ginsburg's estimation, yes. Roe v. Wade was a poorly decided decision. So that didn't work. That was no longer the law of the land. They tossed the ball back to Congress and back to the president themselves. And they have to actually do something. They can't just hide behind this thing that DC politicians have hid behind for so long. And it's a useful tool for them because, I mean, if you look at the voting blocks that are so important to a lot of the Democratic Party, they're losing support amongst Black Americans, losing support amongst Hispanics. They're losing support, of course, amongst the white working class. But a major constituency that is unflappable is single college-age women. Childless single college-age women are essential to the Democratic coalition. And you saw a lot of them screaming in the streets at Joe
Yes.
Biden over Gaza and Hamas. So you're going to win those back. You need to talk about their two favorite things, Hamas and abortion.
Right. Yes. And in case you're wondering, I mean, the whole plan is to keep them single and childless in order to keep that political coalition together. Biden also discussed another fiction last night, this idea that the American right is trying to ban important books or something. Of course, what he's referencing in a dishonest way is the effort by parents to keep pornography out of schools, literally just pornography. That's it. And here's Biden last night. Remember, his administration pressured Amazon to remove books about COVID that disagreed with their policies.
Stop denying another core value of America, our diversity across American life. Banning books, it's wrong. Instead of erasing history, let's make history. I want to protect fundamental rights. Pass the Equality Act. And my message to transgender Americans, I have your back.
If you are transgender, I have your back, said Joe Biden last night. Is that eye on the ball, do you think?
That's wonderful. It's classic. It's the kind of Democratic priority that this White House has put forward, but that the American populace is largely disinterested in. I mean, remember, Joe Biden was not the first pick of really the Democratic Party. Just kind of like Hillary Clinton, who when they wanted Bernie Sanders more like it, but the DNC and powerful leaders put Hillary Clinton ahead. Joe Biden was a compromise candidate because all of the other people he was running against in the 2020 primary were so far to the left. They wanted open borders. They were pushing the trans stuff, whereas Biden was supposed to be the guy who was going to beat Trump because he spoke more to allegedly moderate ideas. He's always had that character, but if you actually look at his politics, if you look at him as vice president, if you disregard his early career in the Senate, he's always been pretty actually far to the left, just with a better delivery. And his White House, which he doesn't seem to be running that well, his policy people are pushing those same policies that you would have gotten no matter who you had as a Democratic nominee. They're pushing these left-wing ideas. And they're also, I wonder how much it's ringing true, because they've been trying, for example, to hang illegal immigration and the border wall on Republicans as opposed to Democrats. So the polling shows that so far that's not working. They're trying to hang. They tried to hang the problems with crime and with police defunding on Republicans. People weren't buying that. The book banning thing seems to have worked so far because of the corporate media has really repeated that it's book banning to stop your children from reading pornography in third grade.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the things are they're running short and they're running scared. And the polling showing that Joe Biden was supposed to be this healer, this grandfatherly figure. They're not even trying to stick with that message anymore. They're just trying to show that he can stand up and, I guess, beat Donald Trump.
Yeah. It's unfortunately, I think it does signal it's going to get darker from here. But in the meantime, Chris Bedford, thank you very much from the Federalist for your insights today. Really appreciate it.